I overheard my wife talking to her friend about how she should cheat on me, so I ruined their lives.
You ever wake up one morning thinking it's just another day, and then your world gets flipped upside down before you've even had your coffee? Well, strap in, Reddit, because that's how this mess kicked off. I'm Brandon. No, not the happily married Brandon with the white picket fence and the wife who adores him. That guy got tossed out the window the second I overheard Helen, my wife of 8 years, giggling on the phone with her friend Angela. Now, Angela's this high-powered marketing exec, always dressed to kill, and with a laugh that could curdle milk. She's the type that considers marriage a game and fidelity a suggestion. I never liked her, but Helen? She practically worshipped the ground Angela strutted on. So, there I was, passing by Helen's home office door on my way to the kitchen, and I catch this snippet of their conversation. Brandon doesn't have to know, it's just a bit of fun. You deserve more than his tired, old-fashioned view of marriage. It hit me like a punch to the gut. My Helen, the one who'd stand by me through thick and thin, getting an earful of this garbagey and agreeing with it. I knew I should have given Helen the choice, Angela or me, earlier, but I messed up and here I am now. I felt this cold rage settle in as I stood there, my hand clenched around the doorknob. This wasn't just a casual chat, this was my wife, being egged on by her so-called friend to cheat. To toss everything we had built together in the trash. And the worst part? She was laughing. That sound, it was like she'd completely forgotten who she was. Or maybe I never knew her at all. That's the raw, unfiltered start of my story, folks. No sweet walks down memory lane here. Just the bitter truth of a man who got a wake-up call he never asked for. I scoured through our bank statements, credit cards, phone bills, you name it. I was looking for anything, a clue that Helen was taking these suggestions from Angela to heart. But here's the kicker, folks. There was nothing. Nada. Zilch. Our bank statements were as mundane as they come. Groceries, a charge for a new blender because I broke ours trying to make margaritas, the usual. Phone bills? The most scandalous thing was the overage charge from Helen's mom calling to talk her ear off. I even started checking the mileage on her car. Yeah, I got that desperate. But every time it added up perfectly to her work and back, maybe a little detour to the grocery store or the gym. It was infuriating. It was like I was trying to catch smoke with my bare hands. Hey everyone. Unfortunately, basically everyone who is watching these videos isn't subscribed. It would mean the world to me to quickly get out of the full screen video for 3 seconds and press that subscribe button. It's free, and you can unsubscribe anytime. Sorry for bothering, and thank you so much if you subscribed. Then there was Angela, who was as slippery as an eel. I dropped by Helen's boutique unannounced, hoping to catch them in some illicit planning session, but it was always business as usual. Smiles, chatter about sales targets, and not even a hint of the deception I'd overheard. It made me doubt my own ears. Had I really heard what I thought I did? I felt like I was living in some parallel universe where everything looked exactly the same but was completely different. Here I was, a man who could turn a piece of wood into art, feeling completely powerless against the intangible. Helen was the perfect wife by all accounts, and Angela, the master manipulator, seemed like the supportive best friend. But you know that feeling in your gut? That gnawing, twisting certainty that something's off? It wouldn't let up. It kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling while Helen slept peacefully beside me. I'd lay there, listening to the rhythm of her breath, wondering if she was dreaming of a life without me. A life Angela had convinced her she deserved. I couldn't shake it. So I kept watching, waiting, because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You hope you're wrong about them even when everything inside of you is screaming that you're not. Hey Reddit, it's Brandon again. When I last left off, I was hanging by a thread, remember? Well, that thread's been fraying like crazy. Every day the same routine. Wake up, watch Helen for any signs, any slip-up, any hint that could prove she wasn't the woman I thought she was. It was eating me alive. I started to lose it, honestly. My workshop, which used to be my sanctuary, started to feel like a prison. I'd stare at a block of wood for hours, chisel in hand, and the patterns I'd usually coax out of the grain just wouldn't come. My clients started asking questions. Is everything all right, Brandon? They'd say. This doesn't look like your best work. And they were right. It wasn't. My buddies would call, ready for a round of beers and some pool, and I'd just ignore the calls. I couldn't face them, couldn't pretend everything was fine while my marriage was dangling over the edge of a cliff. I was the guy who had it all together, but now? I was the guy spying on his wife, doubting her every move, and losing sleep over a conversation that might have meant nothing, or everything. I remember one night, I got up while Helen was still sleeping. I just sat there in the dark, watching the rise and fall of her chest, listening to her breathing. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. I wanted to wake her up, to demand the truth, to end this torment. But I couldn't. I didn't have proof, just this gnawing suspicion that kept whispering in my ear, "She's lying to you." My world narrowed down to this singular focus: find the truth. It wasn't just about whether she was cheating anymore. It was about whether I could trust my own judgment. If I was wrong about her, what else was I wrong about? Myself, my friends, my whole damn life? The isolation was the worst part. It's like I built this wall around myself, brick by brick, with every doubt and every unanswered question. I stopped going to family barbecues, dodged my mom's Sunday dinners, and became a ghost to my own siblings. I was so deep in my own head, I couldn't find the way out. All right, Reddit, it's Brandon again. My story hit a really tough spot. I decided it was time to ask Helen what was going on. I couldn't keep wondering and feeling bad all the time. I came in from working on some furniture in the garage, and there was Helen sitting on the sofa with her phone. I took a deep breath and told her we needed to talk. I was really calm, even though inside I felt like a storm was raging. We sat down and I told her straight up about the phone call I overheard with Angela, about how I couldn't sleep, and about all the times I tried to find out if she was seeing someone else behind my back. I asked her, "Is there someone else, Helen?" She said no, she wasn't seeing anyone else. She cried and said that Angela was just making a bad joke and that I got it all wrong. She wanted me to believe her, she reached out to me, but I just couldn't. I couldn't hold her hand or make her feel better. I really wanted to believe her, guys. She's my wife, Helen, who I've loved for so long. But I just couldn't get Angela's words out of my head. We went to bed that night but didn't talk. We didn't kiss goodnight or say, "I love you," like we usually do. She was crying quietly, and I just lay there, looking up at the ceiling, wondering if I even wanted to know the truth, or if it was better not to know. Out of the blue, I got help from someone I never expected to get involved. I was in my shop, focusing on a piece of wood that was supposed to become someone's rocking chair, trying to find some peace in the familiar shavings and sawdust. That's when Jeff walked in. Now, Jeff is someone I'd call an acquaintance, good for small talk, knows a lot about a lot, and always has a way of popping in when you least expect it. He had this serious look on his face, which wasn't like him at all. He asked if we could step into the back room for a chat, away from the prying eyes of the storefront. So there we were, surrounded by the skeletons of half-finished furniture, and he starts telling me this story. Turns out, Jeff's sister works at the hotel where Angela and Helen have been holding these so-called business meetings. And she's seen Helen there too, but she was never alone. Always with this one guy, always cozy, like they were more than just friends. Jeff said his sister kept it to herself because she didn't want to cause any trouble without being sure of what was happening. I felt like I was in a bad dream. All this time I had this feeling, but no proof. And here was Jeff, handing me the last piece I needed. My head was spinning, but there was also this sense of relief. Finally, I had something solid. Jeff must have seen the emotions on my face because he put a hand on my shoulder and said he was sorry to be the bearer of bad news but thought I had the right to know. He said he'd be there if I needed anything, which was the last thing I expected to hear from him. So, there I was with this information that felt like a heavy brick in my hands. It was the key to everything that had been hidden from me, and now I had a decision to make about what to do next. Okay, Reddit, it's Brandon. After finding out the truth, I had to decide what to do. I didn't want to just lash out, I wanted to be smart about it, to do something that really mattered. First things first, I got my evidence together and talked to a lawyer. I wanted to know where I stood legally. The lawyer said the evidence was good. If it came down to it, I could take Helen to court. But this wasn't just about legal stuff. I wanted Helen and Angela to understand the consequences of their actions. For Angela, I knew I had to be subtle. She worked at this fancy marketing firm and they have a reputation to uphold. So, I sent a carefully worded letter to her boss, suggesting they look into Angela's behavior outside of work. I kept it anonymous and stuck to the facts. Next, I focused on Helen. I waited until she was out, then I took my most important things and left the house. I didn't make a scene. I just left and went to stay with my brother. I needed some space to clear my head. I turned off my phone and stayed off social media. I just needed a break from everything. Helen tried to reach out, of course. She called, she texted, but I wasn't ready to talk to her. Not after all this. That was how I handled it. Quietly, but in a way that let them both know I was serious. It's not over yet, though. There's still more to come in this whole mess. Stay with me. So, I laid out my cards, did what I had to do, and stepped back to watch the fallout. It's been a wild ride, and here's how it all went down after the dust started to settle. I heard through the grapevine what happened with Angela. That letter I sent, it did the trick. Her bosses took a closer look at her, and let's just say they didn't like what they saw. Last I heard, she was put on leave and had to scramble to keep her job. I guess her co-workers started seeing a different side of her, the one I'd been warning them about. Then there's Helen. After I left that evidence on the kitchen table and moved out, things for her got real. She came home to an empty house and a whole lot of truth staring back at her. She tried calling me, leaving voicemails, sending texts, apologies, excuses, promises to change. But I couldn't just forget everything and go back. Too much had happened. I needed time to think, to be away from all the drama. I found out that Helen's boutique started to suffer without her focus. She lost a couple of big clients, and without Angela to push her into the spotlight, things just weren't the same. It was tough on her, that much was clear, but it was the bed she made. Now, let's talk about me for a second. I did a lot of thinking, a lot of solo drives, a lot of staring at the ocean. I wondered if I went too far, if maybe I should have handled things differently. But then I remembered that feeling, that cold pit in my stomach when I first suspected something was wrong. And I knew I couldn't have just let it slide. I don't take joy in what happened to Angela or Helen. It's not about that. It's about actions and consequences. I had to face mine, and they had to face theirs. I just wish it hadn't come to all this. So, here I am, working in my shop again, finding peace in the grains of wood, in the smell of sawdust. I'm picking up the pieces, but it's a slow process. Every day's a little better, a little clearer. I'm starting to feel like myself again, but there's still a ways to go. That's the aftermath, Reddit. It's messy, it's sad, but it's real. This whole saga, it's taught me a lot about trust, about forgiveness, and about moving on. Thanks everyone for listening. It would mean the world to me if you would subscribe to the channel. Thanks and have a great rest of your day or night.
But how can a married woman be behaving so erratically? You are married, you are supposed to commit to your relationship and be faithful, but not my wife. Well, she thought I was a fool, and I decided to show her that I was more than that. My name is Michael, and I am a project manager. I am 29 years old. The name of my wife is Natasha, and she is 25 years old. I love what I do, and I am very proud of what I have been able to achieve for myself at a very young age. And so after everything, I decided it was time for me to settle down, find myself a good woman who could take care of me and my home. That led me to meet Natasha. Natasha and I met through a mutual friend. We met at a business dinner. I liked her immediately, but it looked like Natasha was a kind of person who was not fit to be a wife, because at that time, if you had a conversation with her, she was always going on and on about how she wanted to explore the world, be a free bird, and so on. But honestly, within me, I thought everything was going to change if he started dating, and I introduced her to family life. But I was wrong. They say the leopard can't change its spores, right? After me and Natasha started speaking, everything was going on smoothly, but thinking back now, that was what she wanted me to believe. I told her about my plans for her. She bought into it, and she became my girlfriend officially. Dating Natasha wasn't easy at first, but when I got to know her love language, it was easy for me. I discovered that Natasha was actually a troubled person. She went through certain trauma when she was young, and because of that, she had no family. I told her that my family was going to be her family and she was welcomed anytime. I took her to see my mom, and my mom didn't really warm up to her, and I didn't really know why. I knew that my mom can be a little difficult, but when I told her that this was who I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, she accepted her without any problem. Well, she had no choice. It took me about 3 months for me to get to know Natasha very well. At that point, she was also making an effort in her own way to get to know me. I was happy about it because I felt like the feeling was not one-sided anymore. Natasha had told me that she didn't like my apartment I was staying in at that time, so when I proposed to her, she accepted we had to change my apartment. I gave her the responsibility to do the changes and also do the decor. When she accepted to marry me, I was very happy. I felt like everything was falling into place for me. Not long after, Natasha planned our wedding and we got married very quickly. My family was present. It was very beautiful. It was the happiest day of my life because I got to marry the woman I loved. I told her that there was no limit on my card and she was free to have the wedding of her choice, and so she went all out. I invited friends, family, and loved ones. My colleagues were also there. After the wedding, I decided that we should take a trip for our honeymoon. By that time, we hadn't really parked into our new home. We were still at our hotel. From the hotel, we went for our honeymoon at a beautiful destination. I think that was where half of our problems started from. It was on the trip I discovered that Natasha had a drinking problem, which he blatantly refused. I couldn't enjoy our honeymoon well because I was either taking care of her or avoiding her, because it was exhausting to always see your wife tipsy. I was able to sit her down and made her realize that she had a drinking problem, which she accepted. She accepted that she was going to see a therapist who we were going to talk to together. After the honeymoon, we moved into our new house. Firstly, it was kind of tedious for us because the parking and arrangements were so complex. We had to pick a room, put it together, and make sense of the whole house. After that was done, I sat Natasha down and we made plans to go and see the therapist. After months of seeing the therapist, we were able to deal with her drinking problem through solving the underlying issues, which was closure. After that, we went on to be our normal selves. Our lives were going well. We occasionally go out together and we were able to do things together as a couple. We communicated more and it felt good. Not quite long, Natasha got a job as a sales rep in a company and she started working. She was very happy. You could see the excitement in her. It was a form of freedom for her. She started to work and make her own money and she became really independent. After a few months, the Natasha I knew changed drastically. She was now very out there. Well, I didn't see it as a bad thing because I wanted her to win herself. Business was going fine for me and I was doing okay, but everything changes overnight. It felt like a dream. And it was thanks to somebody, Eve. Eve was a friend that Natasha got acquainted with at her workplace. Eve was definitely a bad influence on Natasha. She was always giving her advice that was not good for a married woman. Natasha could come home and be like, "Why wasn't food ready?" She could say I could come home earlier than her and not make food. But I became so confused because this was something she was doing comfortably before. At that point, I didn't know that she had been fed advice until Natasha invited Eve to our home one time. I honestly felt like something was off with her. She was so condescending. She could always say how I was lucky to be married to Natasha and how I was not doing right by Natasha etc. I became so confused. I told her that Natasha was well taken care of and also we loved each other. After she left, I told Natasha to not take any form of advice her friend was giving her in any way, because I believe she doesn't mean well for her. But at that point, unknown to me, that Natasha had already been captured by Eve. Natasha started coming home late and she could always blame it on her work and so on. Our issues started out small, but it became another thing. Natasha started to avoid me, but I told myself that I wasn't just going to be a weak guy and just nag. I decided to leave her alone and give her space. The space I decided to give her actually worked for me because I avoided her for about 2 months. We were in the same house, but we barely saw each other. I decided to leave the master bedroom for her and I parked into the guest bedroom. After a while, Natasha became frustrated and I ignored her and she came to apologize to me. Natasha thought that I was some kind of weakling whose world revolves around her. I indeed love her, but I was not planning to be used as a boy who was ready at her beck and call. After she apologized, I told her that everything was only going to be over if she made sure that she stopped taking advice from Eve, because Eve did not mean well for her. She agreed, and indeed she obeyed me and stopped seeing Eve, and I was happy because I stopped her from working as a sales rep where Eve also worked. I found a job for her and she was able to start work as an assistant at my friend's company. I did all of this because I loved my wife and I wanted the best for her. A few weeks into Natasha working at my friend's company, she started to have problems with people working there. She became so paranoid at every given chance, and I didn't understand why. She started to accuse me of putting her in a place where they overwork her. It was literally from one problem to another. I didn't put her there for her to start complaining about work ethics. Something I also discovered after our marriage was that Natasha was really a lazy person. She couldn't do basic things around the house. She could always complain about every little thing, but she was not ready to do the needful. After my friend saw that she was not committed to work at his company, he decided to let her go, and I supported it. With Natasha, I can say that I was very patient with her. I believe that it was my fault that I expected too much from someone who was not ready to give it all. After she stopped working, she was now at home on a regular basis. I could come back from work and she could always complain about me coming late, and I could always explain to her that I was busy and I had a lot of things to do at the office. But Natasha didn't believe me that I was actually busy at the office. The stress at the office and coming back home with no peace from my wife, I decided that I should go on the trip that I normally send my employees because I needed a space to breathe, and my wife was making life uncomfortable for me. I didn't want her to continue frustrating me, so I went on a business trip. I called her from the office and I informed her that I was going to travel for business for a few days. She dropped the call on me. I called her back and she didn't pick up. I went on that business trip and I spent about a week there. During that period, I didn't get a call from my wife, but I didn't care. I enjoyed my stay there, and when it was time, I went back home. The trip actually made me relax because I didn't think about anything and I concentrated on my work. I got home late at night after arriving from the trip and I didn't see Natasha at home. I called her, but it didn't go through. After I settled in, she came back quite late into the night. I asked her where she had been all night, and she said I shouldn't question her for doing the same thing that I was doing. I let it slide because I didn't understand what she was saying. It went on for a while. I kept on seeing Natasha with men, and when I asked her, she could say it wasn't anything important and that they were just friends. We could go out on dates, and I could see her flirting with different men, and she could outrightly deny it. And all these angered me a great deal. I called her one day and I tried to explain to her that I could not take being cheated on, and definitely not from the person I loved dearly. She said I was going mad because according to her, she was not cheating on me. I took her word for it. A few weeks later, my friend came to my office and told me he had seen my wife, Natasha, at the club with a man that wasn't me. He even showed me a picture and I took it to go and show her. That day, I explained what I was going through with my wife and how she was saying I was jealous. But it wasn't jealousy because I saw that my wife was going out with men in my presence. My friend advised me that I should handle it carefully and not make any rash decisions. I took the picture and I showed it to my wife, and he told me that I was just imagining things that weren't there. I became so angry and I left the house. How can my wife be doing something I can clearly see and she is telling me otherwise? I decided to go see my mother and I told her what I was going through in my home. She advised to be very careful, and she went on and on about how she never liked Natasha and how her spirit was very off. It was as if my mother was making all my suspicions true. I became so right to me. I asked my mother if I was really going mad or if my suspicions weren't valid, and she told me that I was fine and I shouldn't just jump into conclusion, and that I should also give her the benefit of the doubt that she might not be cheating on me. But I knew that my mother was saying that in order for me to relax. I decided to stay with my mom for a few days. My mother made every effort to put me at ease when I was staying with her. I was leaving her place to work every day, but when my mother brought the idea that she wanted to speak with Natasha and I was very skeptical about it at first, but she said she wanted to just settle us and for things to go back to normal. The next day, my mother had called Natasha over, but she gave my mom different excuses that when she was ready, she could come. A few days later, Natasha came over to my mom's house and she tried to explain to Natasha to calm down and build her marriage, but Natasha was very defensive. She kept complaining that I wasn't doing right by her and I was neglecting her, but I knew it was not true. We had a huge argument in front of my mother and I walked out. How could Natasha be denying something she was clearly doing, which was cheating on me? She made me look as if I didn't know what I was doing, and also it made me look like I wasn't in control of my family. My mother was able to settle us and I left her house with Natasha. We got back home and Natasha and I had another huge argument again. This time it turned out that Natasha was really obsessed with having issues with me. She went on and on about how I took our family issues to my mother and so on. She called my mom different kinds of names and how my mom was a threat to her marriage. I refused to answer and I went on with my life. I could never hit a woman because my mother taught me better, but when she was coming at me, I had to just give her space. After a few days, things had calmed down between us. By then, I was able to resume work, and not quite long, Natasha had come to me that she wanted to know where our marriage was going, because she was tired of all the issues we were having. I told her I was also tired, but if she wanted a divorce, I was ready to give it to her, but she said she didn't want to divorce me and that she loved me. I started to feel like maybe she was bipolar, because what was the meaning of one moment she wanted to chop my head off and another moment she wanted to be in my hands and arms and she wanted peace? It was really confusing. She told me that she wanted us to go to therapy. I agreed and we started going to couple therapy. A Few weeks into it, we were really fighting for ourselves, but everything came crashing down when I discovered that she was still seeing her friend and she still had a kind of relationship with her. It was there that everything made sense to me. Natasha started to see other men, and Natasha flirting with men and so on made absolute sense. It was Eve that was encouraging her. I knew right from the beginning that that lady was a bad influence on my wife, but it was only my wife that was not seeing that Eve was out to destroy her. After I found that out, I went on for a while and I refused to speak to her. I could come back from the office and I could avoid her. So it was made clear to me that she had really been influenced, so all this while she was making me look like a fool, she was really cheating on me. She made it out to look like I was the one that had the problem, like I was jealous of sort. It honestly looked like I was mad. I decided that I was not going to be used as a puppet anymore. I was going to take back control of my life and my family. And the decision I decided to make was going to be cutting off any form of problem. And that is going to start from my wife, Natasha. I was completely done with the marriage, and I was going to make sure that my revenge was going to be as cruel as possible. But firstly, what I did for myself was to heal from all the trauma that Natasha made me pass through. She made it look like I was crazy, that I didn't know what I was doing. But deep in my heart, I knew I wasn't mad. I made sure to sit her down and I asked her what she did during our marriage, and it was then she told me that she had been misled by her friend Eve. She had told me that Eve was known for destroying homes because she was always jealous of the happiness of people close to her. Natasha begged me to forgive her, but I made sure to continue to ask her questions. She had told me that Eve had convinced her to cheat on me because I was also doing the same. But I made Natasha understand that I never for once cheated on her. But she told me that she knows now. I was very confused at her attitude. All of a sudden, you have realized that you have been fed lies all these while? She told me that I should forgive her and we should forget everything and move forward, but I told her I wasn't going to do that. I didn't have plans to forgive her because she treated me as trash. For someone I showed love and care, I expected more from her. I told her that I needed space and she should find somewhere else to stay for the meantime. She agreed that I do need space to think. She moved out of the house with a few of her things, and I decided I was going to make my final decision with my peace of mind as my top priority. I went to my mother for advice, and she told me to do anything that could make me be at peace with myself. And she told me that she was ready to support me regardless of anything decision I decide to take. After a few weeks, I decided to call my lawyers, and I told them to go ahead and draft the divorce papers as soon as possible. And it wasn't long before the papers were ready, and it was sent to Natasha. A few days after she received the papers, she came to my office to beg me to forgive her, but I told her that honestly I was tired and I had nothing to give to her anymore. If she had valued our relationship, she shouldn't have cheated on me. She kept on going on and on about how she was misled, but I made her understand that cheating was something she made up her mind to do. She wasn't forced to do it. I told her that she should come over to the house and get her things because I was ready to move forward. The divorce went on for months because Natasha was refusing to sign the divorce papers and it was slowing me down. At that point, all the feelings I had for her were already gone. My lawyers kept reaching out to me that Natasha had refused to sign the papers. She thought that there was something to save, that was why she was delaying it. She kept going to my mother's home, but my mother didn't listen to her because when my mother wanted to settle us, she never gave her any form of regard. She had always disrespected my mother, and I don't know why she was going to her. I called Natasha and I told her face to face that there was nothing to fight for anymore and she should stop going to my mother. After that day, she stopped and she signed the divorce papers. I was finally freed. I decided not to give her a penny in the divorce because she didn't deserve any. By the time the divorce was finished, about 5 months later, she came to my office to apologize to me because of how she treated me and everything she made me pass through. I told her that I was over it and we should just move forward. But I asked her if I ever treated her badly in the marriage, if I ever looked down on her, but she said no. I was so happy I wasn't the problem after all. I didn't have to deal with the burden that my marriage failed because I didn't put in enough work. Natasha left my office that day and I was so relieved that everything was finally over. I can finally move on and be free from everything. It was indeed over. Update. It has been about a year since I last saw or even spoke to Natasha. I am happy now. I think I have healed from all the trauma, and I honestly believe that I had put pressure on her to be my wife then. I never did that, but seeing everything that went down, I feel like Natasha didn't love me like I loved her. Everything was seriously one-sided. I was the one that was holding that marriage together for that long, and when it was time for me to stop giving, she finally realized her mistake and she decided to fight for us. But when I needed her to fight, she was not there, rather she was in the arms of other men. Right now, I told myself I was going to give love a chance, but this time I wasn't going to force anything, because I feel like I forced things with Natasha. I will just let everything play out, and that has been what I've been doing for a while now. I definitely hope that Natasha finds love, but I don't care if she does. I don't even want to think about her or anything that has to do with her. She doesn't deserve my empathy at all, so I'll definitely leave my thoughts fat away from her.